we do handle those type of cases, and so at intake, we talk about that. We talk about on a cessation case, the point of improvement and what they're looking at in there, and we talk about an overpayment. And as an aside, on overpayment, my experience has been you can win an overpayment if you can generally show that it's through no fault of your client. It's two things to prove. One of them, it's no fault of your client. Two of them, that it's against equity to make your client repay it. Well, Social Security at the initial decision and the reconsideration will always find it's your client's fault, because they can always cite to some brochure that they gave them 5 years ago when they were placed on disability that told them, you got to tell us this. So it's always your client's fault, and then they never get to the second issue. But I find in cases where the client has reported income and Social Security has told them, we'll let you know. The classic trial work period where they're reporting that. I had one case where we were contacted by the client and they had triggered the Office of the Inspector General to do a criminal investigation for fraud on this couple. We got involved and got copies, and thank goodness whoever does this, my clients had kept copies of the stuff they sent in, and we could show, well, these were wandering around the Social Security office somewhere at that point in time. And as soon as we gave them the OIG investigator, and not only did they drop that, we won on the overpayment because they had given them the information about the wife returning to work, and we could show that. The cases that you're almost never going to prevail on in that case, if you're talking to a client on an intake, gee, I just never told them. Right. You know, it's an equity decision. I find there's nothing to appeal on those cases generally if it's equity, particularly because part of it is it fair to make them repay it or not repay it? So, but many times your client would have provided them information and it's been misplaced, or the person is replaced by somebody else, but they often don't deny it, you know, and they'll say, well, they told me they would let me know when I had worked too much. So they keep reporting and send them in, and the trial work period's gone by, and 2 or 3 years they run a record check, and oh my goodness. Well, it's at the initial level, it's their fault, the client's fault. They say, well, you should have known the rules. But most judges, I find, will determine if you provided them the information you were supposed to provide them, and Social Security never got around to doing anything with it until later, it's not your fault, generally. And you can indicate it's unfair to make them repay it. That will generally be a financial study. And so if you're doing an overpayment on an intake case, you want to get the financial data. You'll be looking at what's called a waiver, and part of that form is going to be, is it fair to make them repay it? Because they want to know, can they make their living expenses without it? So it's two prongs that you have to meet in order to get that waiver of the overpayment. But if they've told them all the information and they're really in distress, then that's something that we found that judges are able to pay. And you can be paid if you have a client who's in a position to allow you to escrow those funds. Just make sure that you do a good job of they're escrowed and accounted, and that you count their system, so when there's a decision, if it's adverse to your client, that you refund that to them without having to wait for them to contact you. If you're an attorney, and I understand those who are watching this may or may not all be attorneys, if you're an attorney, there will be a trust account required by your state, and in most all states that I'm aware of, where you have to deposit those type of client funds, because you're not even allowed to take they're not interest bearing in most cases. I'm not sure again in what state you're located in, but most of them are not interest bearing, so that you can't take it and collect the interest off of it. You're just getting it there as a form to make payment.